Lena did not know she was going to lose everything on a Tuesday. She thought Tuesday was just another ordinary morning. She thought she would wake up, fold the laundry she had left in the basket the night before, eat something small because her stomach had been difficult lately, and then wait for Darian to come home from the early pack assembly. She thought life was still the thing she had built carefully over 3 years. Slow, steady, and hers. She was wrong. She had felt something shifting in the weeks before, the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds actually arrive. Darian had started coming home later. Not dramatically late, not the kind of late that screams something is wrong, but the kind of late that makes a person lie awake and stare at the ceiling and tell herself she is imagining things. He had stopped reaching for her hand when they walked through the settlement. He had stopped asking how she was feeling even though she was 5 months along, and her back had started aching in a way that made her breath catch sometimes. He had stopped looking at her the way he used to look at her, which was the worst part, because she remembered very clearly how that look used to feel, and its absence was loud in a way nothing else was. Gray Hollow was a small settlement, the kind of place where everyone knew your name, and your business, and your grandmother's business too. It sat between 2 old hills on the edge of a wide valley, and the houses were close together, and the people were closer. Lena had grown up on the outer edge of a different settlement, a quieter place called Milfen, and she had come to Gray Hollow 3 years ago when she bonded with Darian. She had tried, from the very first week, to belong here. She had learned which families you greeted first at gatherings. She had learned which elders preferred to be addressed formally, and which ones preferred a warm smile and a plate of food. She had made herself useful. She had made herself small enough to fit, and for a while, it seemed to work. But Gray Hollow had its own kind of loyalty, and it ran in a direction that Lena would not fully understand until it was too late. The pack was proud of its bloodlines. It spoke about strength and lineage, the way other people spoke about weather, constantly, casually, as if these were the most natural things in the world to care about. Lena had never thought much about lineage before she came here. She was an Omega, yes, and she carried that designation the way she carried her name, simply, without much ceremony. It had never felt like a wound until Gray Hollow taught her to see it as one. She had told Darian about the pregnancy on a quiet evening when the sun was low and the light in their small home was golden, and she had been so happy she could barely hold it inside herself. She had pressed his hand against her stomach even though there was nothing to feel yet, and she had watched his face, waiting for the joy she was certain would come. There had been something there, a flicker of something warm, but it passed quickly, replaced by a careful, neutral expression she did not know how to read. He had said the right things. He had said he was glad, that they would figure it out, that they should tell the elders soon. But he had not pulled her close. He had not held her the way a person holds someone when news is too good to contain. He had patted her hand, and then excused himself to go check something outside, and she had stood alone in that golden light, telling herself she was reading too much into nothing. She was not reading too much into nothing. The morning everything broke open. Darian was already dressed when she woke up. That was unusual. He normally moved slowly in the mornings, complained about the cold floor, took his time with his coffee. But that morning he was dressed and standing near the window with his back to her, and when she said his name, he did not turn around immediately. He waited just a breath too long, and then he turned, and his face was the face of someone who had already decided something, and was now simply waiting for the moment to say it. He told her they needed to go to the council hall. He said there was a meeting. He did not tell her it was about her. The council hall in Gray Hollow was a wide, low building near the center of the settlement. It smelled of old wood and something faintly herbal, and the chairs were arranged in a half circle around a raised platform, where the elders sat when decisions were being made. Lena had only been inside it a handful of times. She had attended a welcome ceremony here when she first arrived. She had attended a naming ceremony for a neighbor's child. She had not been here for anything that felt threatening, and so when she walked in that morning and saw the elders already seated, already waiting, already watching her with expressions she could not quite name, she felt the first real pull of fear. There were 6 elders. Elder Gorman, who was the oldest and who always smelled of pipe tobacco, sat at the center. He had kind eyes, in the way that certain old men have kind eyes that have seen enough of life to feel little, and so wear the shape of kindness, as a kind of armor. On either side of him sat the others, men and women, whose names Lena knew, but whose regard she had never fully earned. There were also several other pack members present, neighbors, people she had greeted for 3 years at the market and the gathering fires, people whose children she had watched and whose food she had eaten. They stood along the walls. They did not look at her directly. Darian stood beside her for exactly 30 seconds. She would count them later when she was trying to make sense of it all. 30 seconds, and then he stepped away from her and stepped up toward the platform, and he turned to face her from that higher ground, and Lena understood in an instant that the distance between them was not just physical. Elder Gorman spoke first. He said that a matter of pack welfare and alignment had been brought to the council's attention. He said that in the interest of the pack's strength and future stability, a formal review of the bond between Lena Maris and Darian Cole had been requested. He said these things in a very level voice, the way people speak when they are delivering words they have rehearsed. Darian spoke next. He looked at a point slightly above her head when he spoke, which she noticed, and which she would remember for a very long time. He said that he had come to understand that their bond was not one that served the pack. He used those words exactly, not one that served the pack. He said that he had thought carefully about the future, about what Grey Hollow needed, about the responsibilities of someone in his position to consider not just his own happiness, but the broader well-being of the community he belonged to. He said that Lena's lineage, which was Omega on both sides going back several generations, did not provide the kind of standing that a family building toward a leadership role could afford. He said that the child she carried, while not something he wished ill upon, was not something he could claim as part of his future in Grey Hollow. He said he was formally withdrawing the bond. Lena stood very still. The hall was so quiet that she could hear the wood settling in the walls. She could feel 20 pairs of eyes on her, some curious, some uncomfortable, a very few holding something that looked almost like sympathy, but not quite enough of it to matter. She could feel her own heartbeat, which had slowed rather than raced, which surprised her. She had thought that if something terrible happened she would panic. Instead she felt something cold and clear move through her, the way water moves through a cracked thing, filling every space. She did not beg. She had told herself, in the months of unease that had led to this morning, that if this moment ever came, she would not beg. And she did not. She looked at Darian, at his careful eyes pointed at the wall above her, and she looked at Elder Gorman, and she said, in a voice that did not shake, that she understood. She asked whether there was anything she needed to sign. Elder Gorman said that a formal notation would be recorded. She nodded. She turned around, and she walked out of the council hall, and she did not look back. She made it to the narrow path behind the hall before her legs stopped working properly. She sat down on the edge of a stone wall that bordered someone's garden, and she pressed both hands against her stomach, against the swell of the child who was still there, still present, still entirely unaware of the world she had just been ejected from. She sat there for a long time. The morning moved around her. Birds, wind, the distant sound of someone hammering something. And she breathed, and she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened, because she had learned early in life that if you do not let pain arrive properly, it tends to stay longer. She was 26 years old. She was 5 months pregnant. She had just been publicly refused, labeled as insufficient, and separated from the only home she had built as an adult. She had $40 in her pocket, a small bag of her own clothes in the house that was no longer hers, and no family within 300 miles. The child in her belly moved, a small flutter, like a question being asked from the inside. She pressed her hands down and said, very quietly, "I know, we are going to be all right." She did not entirely believe it yet. But she said it, because saying things sometimes makes them more possible, and she needed it to be possible. The first person to speak to her after she walked away from that hall was an older woman named Clara Dutton, who lived at the end of the settlement's main lane, and who had a reputation for saying exactly what she thought. Clara came around the corner of the garden wall with a cloth bag over one arm, and stopped when she saw Lena sitting there. She looked at her for a long moment, not with pity exactly, but with the honest recognition of one woman seeing another woman's trouble, and not pretending otherwise. Clara set her bag down. She sat on the wall beside Lena. She did not ask what had happened, because Grey Hollow was small, and she likely already knew. She said, "Do you have somewhere to go?" Lena said she was thinking about that. Clara nodded. She reached into her bag, and pulled out a worn piece of paper and a pen, and wrote down an address. She said her sister ran a boarding house near Route 9, about 40 minutes north by bus, and that her sister was not affiliated with any pack, and that her sister was a good woman who did not ask too many questions. She folded the paper and put it in Lena's hand. "She will charge you something small," Clara said, "but it will be a real roof." Lena looked at the paper. She said thank you, and she meant it in a way that went deeper than the word could carry. Clara picked up her bag and stood up. She looked at Lena one more time, with that same honest look, and then she said something that Lena would carry with her for years. She said, "The ones who do the casting out always think they are the strong ones. They are not. The strong one is the one walking away." Then Clara went about her morning, because that was also what Clara did. She said the true thing, and then she kept moving. Lena sat for a little while longer, then she stood up. She went back to the house, which she still had access to because no one had taken the key from her yet, though she suspected that was coming soon. She packed what was hers into the 2 bags she owned. She took her documents, her small savings, the worn photograph of her mother she kept on the windowsill, the soft blue blanket she had already bought for the baby, and nothing else. She left the key on the kitchen table. She walked out without leaving a note, because there was nothing left to say. She caught the noon bus north. She sat in the second-to-last row, her bags at her feet, her hands in her lap, and she watched Grey Hollow disappear through the back window, until the hills swallowed it entirely, and there was nothing left but road. She thought about Darian once, briefly, the way you think about a door that is closed and locked from the other side. She thought about the expression on his face when he spoke, the careful blankness of it, and she understood something in that moment that she had not fully understood before, that the version of her he had once chosen was never fully her. It was a version that fit inside a space he had made, and when she stopped fitting, it was not because she had changed. It was because the space had always been too small. She turned away from the window. She put her hand on her stomach. The bus moved north. She told herself she was not running from anything. She was moving toward something, even if she could not yet see what it was. That is the thing about the road ahead. It does not show you everything at once. It only shows you the next few miles, and sometimes, if you are lucky, the next few miles are enough. The bus let her off at a junction on Route 9, just before 4 in the afternoon. The address Clara had given her was a 10-minute walk down a side road, and Lena walked it with both bags, and her pregnancy, and all of the morning's weight pressed against her, and she arrived at a 2-story white house, with green shutters and a hand-painted sign near the door that read, Callaway Rooms. She knocked. A woman in her late 60s opened the door, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked at Lena with the practical eye of someone who had seen many people arrive at her door in various states of need. "You Clara's friend?" the woman said. "She gave me your address," Lena said. "I am Lena." The woman, whose name was Mabel Callaway, looked her over once, looked at the bags, looked at the obvious curve of her stomach, and then stepped aside and held the door open. "Come in then," she said. "I will show you the room. Bathroom is shared. Breakfast is at 7 if you want it. Quiet after 9. Lena stepped inside. It was not much. The room was small, with a narrow bed, and a window that looked out over a yard, with an apple tree in it. The floor creaked. The radiator made a sound like it was thinking about working, but had not fully committed. But it was warm, and it was clean, and it was hers for as long as she could pay for it, which was something. It was enough, for now, to be something. She set her bags on the floor. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the apple tree through the window, its bare branches crossing the gray afternoon sky, like the lines of a map, with no destination marked. She had left one life, entirely behind, in a single morning. She had no job. She had savings that would last perhaps 3 weeks if she was careful. She had a baby arriving in 4 months. She had a small piece of paper with an address on it, and a room with a creaking floor, and a radiator that was still making up its mind. She sat with all of that for a while. Then she got up. She unpacked her bags. She put her mother's photograph on the windowsill where she could see it. She folded the blue blanket and set it at the foot of the bed. She smoothed the bed cover, even though it did not really need smoothing. She was starting over. It was terrible, and it was also the only thing left to do. And so she began. The days that followed were built from small and very necessary things. Lena found work within the first week, because she could not afford not to. Mabel, who turned out to be more watchful and more generous than she first appeared, mentioned to her on the second morning that a woman 2 lanes over needed someone to help with laundry 3 days a week, and that the diner on the main road was sometimes looking for someone to prep vegetables in the early shift. Lena said yes to both without hesitation. The laundry work paid modestly. The diner paid slightly better, and also meant she could eat something warm before she came home. She was careful with every dollar. She wrote down what she spent in a small notebook she found in the room's single desk drawer, and she added and subtracted with the focus of someone who understands that math, at a certain point in life, becomes a matter of survival. She did not buy anything she did not strictly need. She mended her clothes when they tore instead of replacing them. She ate simply. She walked rather than taking the bus on the shorter routes, even when her feet were tired and her back protested. She did not let herself grieve, not fully, not yet. There was too much to do, and grief takes up space that she needed for other things. But it came anyway, the way grief does, in odd moments when she was not prepared for it. It came when she was hanging laundry, and a small jacket belonging to the family she worked for flapped in the wind, a child's jacket, blue with yellow buttons, and she stood there holding a wet sheet and could not move for a full minute. It came when she overheard a man on the street speaking to his partner with easy warmth, his hand on her shoulder. Nothing remarkable about it, just ordinary affection, and Lena felt the absence of that kind of ordinary like a physical thing. It came at night, when the radiator finally chose to work and made the room too warm, and she lay awake with her hand on her growing stomach and thought about all the things this child deserved to have, and was already starting life without. She let herself feel those moments. She did not run from them. And then, each time, she did the same thing. She breathed through it. She pressed her hand against her stomach, and she chose, deliberately, and sometimes with great effort, to put one thing in front of the next. Mabel noticed more than she said. She began appearing at Lena's door occasionally with extra food, a bowl of soup, a portion of bread, the kind of extras that could plausibly be explained as leftovers but were really something else entirely. She never made a ceremony of it. She just set the thing down and walked away, before Lena could thank her properly, which Lena understood was intentional, because Mabel was the sort of woman who did kindness the way other people did breathing, without wanting credit for it. There was one other long-term boarder in the house, a quiet man in his 40s named Owen, who drove trucks for a regional freight company and was home only 2 or 3 nights a week. He and Lena crossed paths at the kettle sometimes in the early mornings. He was not a talkative person, but he was decent, the way some quiet people are decent without needing to announce it. He once fixed the lock on her room door, which had been sticking, without being asked, and without saying anything about it afterward. She thanked him when she saw it done, and he shrugged and said it was nothing, which was also a kind of language. At 2 months before her due date, Lena went to a local clinic to have a proper checkup. She had been putting it off, partly because of money, and partly because of the particular vulnerability of being seen by strangers in a system she was not sure she could trust. The nurse who saw her was a brisk, practical woman named Dot, who asked all the right questions, took all the right measurements, and at the end of the appointment looked at Lena over the top of her clipboard and said simply, "You are doing well. The baby is healthy. Keep eating." Lena had to look at the ceiling for a moment when Dot said that, because those words, "You are doing well," arrived in a place inside her that had been waiting a long time to hear something true and kind. She blinked twice and thanked her, and made the next appointment. She named the baby before she was born. She had been turning names over in her mind for weeks, running them quietly through her thoughts while she worked, and walked, and lay awake at night. She wanted a name that was not borrowed from anything painful. She wanted a name that felt like possibility, rather than memory. One evening she was sitting by the window watching the apple tree in the last of the daylight, and the name arrived the way certain things arrive, not thought of so much as simply heard, as if it had been waiting in the air. "Iris." She said it out loud. The room was quiet around her. The baby moved inside her, a shift and a nudge that she was getting to know the rhythm of, and Lena laughed softly, because it felt like an answer. "All right," she said. "Iris it is." She told Mabel at breakfast the next morning, because Mabel had become the closest thing she had to a witness for her life, and naming a child deserves at least one witness. Mabel set down her coffee and said it was a beautiful name, and then she said nothing more about it, because Mabel understood that some moments are large enough without adding to them. The birth happened on an evening in late autumn. It was faster than Lena had expected, and harder, and louder, and Mabel was there because Dot had said someone should be there, and there was no one else. Mabel sat in the corner of the small room the clinic had given Lena, and did not say very much. But she was present, which was what mattered. When it was over, when the room had gone quiet, and the medical staff had done what they needed to do, and then given Lena some space, Mabel came and stood next to the bed and looked at Iris, who was very small and very red and very loud, and Mabel said, very quietly, "Hello, little one." Lena held her daughter and understood for the first time what it means to love something you have never met before. She had expected to feel many things in that moment. Exhaustion, yes, and relief. But she had not expected this specific quality of recognition, this sense of knowing someone entirely and completely, in the instant of meeting them. Iris's face was scrunched and furious and perfect, and Lena thought, with a clarity that cut through everything else, "I will do anything for you. Every single thing, whatever it takes." She stayed in the clinic for 2 days. When she came back to Mabel's house, Mabel had cleaned her room without being asked, and put a small lamp on the table by the bed, and folded the blue blanket into the corner where it could be reached easily. Lena stood in the doorway holding Iris, and looked at all of that small, careful preparation, and she pressed her lips together for a moment, and then walked in. She had a baby. She had a room with a creaking floor, and an apple tree outside the window. She had very little money, and a body that needed time to recover, and a future that was not yet visible. She had been told, formally and publicly, that she was not enough. She held Iris against her chest, and looked out at the apple tree, and thought, "Watch me." She did not say it to anyone. She said it only to herself, in the particular quiet of a person who has decided something, and does not need anyone else to know it yet. She said it the way a person plants a seed, without ceremony, without announcement, just the act of pressing something important into the ground, and trusting that the ground will hold it. She did not know what was coming. She did not know about the highway, or the morning that would test her beyond anything she had yet faced, or the black vehicle that would slow on the shoulder of Route 9 and change the entire direction of her life. She knew none of that yet. She only knew that she was here, and Iris was here, and the lamp Mabel had put on the table was giving off a warm and steady light, and that was enough, for this moment, to begin. Outside the window, the apple tree was bare against the night sky. Its branches lifted like arms opened wide, patient and waiting, the way living things wait, not knowing what is coming but reaching toward it anyway. 2 months passed, in the way that months pass when you are surviving rather than living. Not quickly, not slowly, but in a kind of relentless forward motion that does not leave much room for anything except the next thing that needs to be done. Lena fell into the rhythm of it almost without noticing, feeding Iris in the dark before the house was awake, taking the early shift at the diner when Mabel could watch the baby for 2 hours, folding laundry in the afternoons with Iris in a basket beside her, sleeping in the short gaps between one need and the next. She was tired in a way she had never been tired before, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that lives in the bones and the back and the space behind the eyes. She knew this tiredness was temporary, that Iris would sleep longer stretches as the weeks went on, that the body adjusts to almost anything given enough time. She told herself this regularly, especially in the 3 o'clock hour, when the darkness seemed to last forever, and Iris was crying, and the room felt very small, and the world felt very large. She did not complain. There was no one to complain to, and besides, complaining felt like a luxury she could not afford. She had made a choice on the day she walked out of Grey Hollow, not to fold, not to look backward, not to let the weight of what had happened press her into the ground. Every morning she got up and made that choice again. Sometimes it was harder than others, but she made it. And then, on a Tuesday morning in the beginning of winter, a Tuesday, which had already proven itself to be her most difficult day of the week, everything that had been holding together came apart at once. It started with a letter. Mabel slid it under her door before breakfast, which was not something she normally did. Lena picked it up off the floor while Iris slept in the basket, and she opened it and read it standing by the window in the early light, still in her sleep clothes, and the words arranged themselves in front of her into a shape she had not been prepared for. The house was being sold. Mabel's son, a man named Gerald who lived in the city, and whom Lena had never met, had made the decision. The letter was formal, written in legal language that was trying to be kind about something unkind, and what it said, stripped of all the careful phrasing, was this: everyone in the house had 72 hours to make other arrangements. 72 hours. Lena set the letter on the windowsill beside her mother's photograph. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked out at the apple tree, which had started to show the very first traces of buds at the tips of its branches, tiny and green and entirely indifferent to the problem at hand. She had $61. She had a 2-month-old baby. She had a left forearm that had been aching for the past week in a way that worried her. She had fallen 3 weeks earlier, a bad step on the outside stairs in the dark, and she had caught herself on that arm and heard a sound she had not wanted to hear, and she had wrapped it tightly in an elastic bandage because the clinic was not within easy walking distance, and she did not have money for it, and she had told herself it would heal on its own. It had not healed on its own. It had gotten quieter, the pain, but it was still there, a low, persistent complaint that was loudest when she tried to use the arm for anything heavier than lifting Iris. She sat on the edge of the bed. She thought carefully, the way she had learned to think, not with panic, but with the focused attention of someone doing a complicated calculation under pressure. She went through every option she could think of, one by one, the way you sort through a drawer looking for something you need. She called the 3 shelters in the area, whose numbers she had written in her notebook months ago, in case she ever needed them. The first one was full. The second had a waiting list of 11 people. The third did not answer. She called a woman from the diner, a friendly woman named Patricia who had once mentioned having a spare room she sometimes rented. Patricia said she was sorry. The room was already being used by her nephew. She called a number for a PAC-neutral housing service she had found on a notice board at the clinic. The line rang, and no one picked up. She left a message. No one called back. She spent the first 24 hours trying to find a solution that did not involve the road. She spent them making calls and writing in her notebook and running numbers that kept coming out wrong. Iris slept and woke and fed and slept again, unaware of the math problem her mother was trying to solve. On the morning of the second day, Mabel knocked on her door. She came in and sat on the small chair by the desk, and she looked at Lena with an expression that held grief and guilt in equal measure. "I am sorry," Mabel said, and it was clear from the way she said it that she meant something much larger than the word usually carries. "Gerald has always done things this way. Decided and then informed. I found out the same day you did." Lena said she knew, and she meant it. Mabel handed her a folded piece of paper. She said her daughter lived in a town called Ashenvale, 3 hours north on Route 9, and that Ashenvale had a coalition resource center that was PAC neutral, and that helped displaced Omegas with housing and legal referrals and other things. She said she had written down the address and the phone number, and that her daughter's name was on there too, and that if Lena could get to Ashenvale, she should call the center first and her daughter second. Lena looked at the paper. She said thank you. Mabel put $100 on the desk, folded in half. Lena started to refuse. Mabel raised one hand and said she did not want to hear it, and the tone of her voice was so firm and so loving that Lena closed her mouth. "That is not charity," Mabel said. "That is what is owed to you, for the work you did here, and the company you were, and for that baby, who deserves someone to think of her." She stood up. "Take the bus, if you can afford the fare. If you cannot, the shelter in Harfield might cover it, but get to Ashenvale." She went to the door. She paused. She looked back at Lena and at Iris in her basket, and her face did something complicated and quiet. "You are going to be all right," she said. It was almost exactly what Lena had said to herself on the day Iris was born, and hearing it come from outside herself, from someone who had watched her these past months and still believed it, hit her somewhere deep and clean. "Thank you," Lena said, "for the last time." Mabel nodded and closed the door softly behind her. Lena sat with the $100 and the paper and the quiet room for a while. She worked out the bus fare. With what Mabel had given her and what she already had, she could cover it with enough left over for a few days of basic needs once she arrived. It was tight. It was the kind of tight that requires everything to go right, which is not a comfortable way to plan anything, but it was a plan. She packed that afternoon. She was more practiced at it now than she had been 4 months ago. She knew what was essential and what was not. She packed Iris's things first: the blanket, the small soft hat, the spare clothes, the things needed for feeding. Then her own things, her documents, her notebook, her mother's photograph, 2 changes of clothing. She left what she could not carry. She folded the elastic bandage more firmly around her forearm and flexed her fingers slowly to test the pressure. The pain was sharp but manageable. She had managed sharper things. That evening she went to find Mabel to say goodbye properly. But Mabel was not in the house. She later found out that Mabel had gone to her sister's for the night, which Lena understood was probably intentional. Mabel was not someone who could do goodbyes well. Neither, it turned out, was Lena. She left a note on the kitchen table. It said, "Thank you for the roof, and the soup, and the lamp. I will not forget any of it." She went back to her room. She fed Iris and got her settled, and then she sat by the window in the dark and looked at the apple tree one last time, its small new buds visible even in the night, green and stubborn and reaching, and she thought, that is a good thing to be. She slept a few hours. She woke early. She checked the bus schedule and found that the first bus north did not leave until 9 in the morning. She had time. She made herself eat something, bread, and the last of the peanut butter from the jar she had been careful with for weeks. She fed Iris. She changed her. She bundled her into the soft carrier she had pieced together from a length of sturdy fabric, the kind that wraps and ties around the body to hold a baby close against the chest, which she had learned to do from a tutorial she had read at the clinic. She adjusted the wrap around her own torso, working mostly with her right arm, and settled Iris inside it, the baby's warm weight pressing against her heart. She put on her coat. She picked up her backpack and slung it over her right shoulder. She looked around the room one final time, at the bare windowsill where her mother's photograph had been, at the floor where the creek was, at the corner where Iris had slept in her basket through so many mornings. Then she closed the door, and she walked out of that chapter of her life, and she began the next one. The bus stop was 12 minutes from the house on foot. She walked those 12 minutes in the early gray morning, her good arm holding the backpack strap, her broken arm cradling the base of the carrier where Iris rested, the pain in her forearm steady and known, and something she was used to now. A few cars passed. No one stopped or looked twice. She was just a woman with a baby and a backpack walking in the early morning, which is not a remarkable sight to anyone who does not know the story behind it. She reached the bus stop and she sat on the bench and she waited. At 8:40 in the morning, a bus arrived. But it was not the Route 9 North bus. It was a different route entirely, and the driver said the North bus had a mechanical issue and would not be running today. He said the next available service to Ashenvale was the afternoon coach, which left at 2 in the afternoon from the Harfield depot, which was 8 miles east. 8 miles east. She had enough money for the afternoon coach, but not enough for a taxi, and there was no other bus going to Harfield before noon. She asked the driver if there was another way. He looked at her with the tired patience of someone who is asked questions he cannot answer many times a day, and he said he was sorry, and he closed the door, and the bus pulled away. Lena stood at the stop for a moment. She looked north along Route 9, which was the direct road, the 4-lane highway that ran straight and long toward Ashenvale. It was not a walking road. It was a highway, with a gravel shoulder and no sidewalk and trucks that moved at speed, and early morning light that was still gathering itself from the gray. She stood there, and she did the calculation. 8 miles east to Harfield to catch an afternoon bus, or she waited here until whenever the replacement service arrived, if it arrived. Waiting cost time, and the morning air was cold, and Iris was settled and quiet against her chest, but would not stay settled and quiet indefinitely. She looked north. She looked at the road. She looked at the gravel shoulder, which was at least a few feet wide, enough to walk on if you were careful. She thought about Ashenvale. She thought about the resource center, and Mabel's daughter, and the possibility of something that was not this constant pressure of not enough, and no option, and tomorrow unknown. She shifted the backpack on her right shoulder. She checked that Iris was secure in the wrap. She flexed the fingers of her left hand, and felt the forearm protest, and then go quiet. She stepped onto Route 9. She faced north, and she began to walk. She had been walking for about 40 minutes when she understood that this was harder than she had calculated. The highway shoulder was wide enough, and there were no close calls with traffic, but the road was long and straight, and the trucks were loud, and the cold air moved with the passing vehicles in a way that pushed at her every few seconds. Her backpack was pulling on her right shoulder, and she had shifted it twice already without finding a position that did not eventually hurt. Her forearm was louder than usual, the pain stepping up from a background note to something more present, especially when she used it to support the base of Iris's carrier. She tried to use her right arm more and save the left, but you cannot walk with a baby and a backpack for any real distance without both arms contributing somehow, and her body knew it even when her mind tried to argue otherwise. Iris was calm. That helped more than anything. The baby was warm inside the wrap, her head tucked just below Lena's chin, her breathing slow and steady, lulled by the rhythm of walking. Lena matched her pace to that breathing. She found a steadiness in it, a kind of anchor. As long as Iris was calm, she could keep going. She counted steps for a while, and then she stopped counting because the numbers were not helping. She focused instead on the next visible point on the road. A road sign, a bridge overpass, a bend in the distance. And she walked to it, and then she chose the next one. This is how very long things get done. Not by seeing the whole distance, but by choosing the next visible point, and moving toward it, and then the next, and then the next. A few cars passed close enough that she felt the air move. She stayed as far to the edge of the shoulder as she could. She kept her eyes on the road ahead. She did not allow herself to think about how many miles were left, because that was not useful information right now. What was useful was the next step, the one after that. At some point, without intending to, she began talking to Iris. She was not even sure at first that she was doing it. It came out quietly, under the noise of the highway, just words, the kind that are not quite sentences, descriptions of what she could see, the color of the sky, the way the light was starting to come through the clouds, the fact that there was a crow on a fence post, about 100 yards ahead, sitting very still, and very self-important. The kind of crow that acts as though the fence was built specifically for it. She told Iris about the crow in a low, murmured voice, and Iris made a small sound against her chest, and Lena kept talking. She talked about Mabel and the apple tree, and the name she had chosen, and the reasons she had chosen it. She talked about Ashenvale, about what she hoped it would be, about the resource center, and the possible room, and the possibility of something like a beginning. She told Iris about her own mother, whose photograph was in the backpack right now, a woman named Rose who had raised Lena mostly alone, and who had been both hard and warm, the way the good mothers often are. She told Iris that she was going to know that photograph well, and that the woman in it was someone worth knowing. She did not tell Iris that her arm was hurting badly now, worse than it had been since the original fall. She did not say that her back was a wall of tension from the shoulder straps, or that her feet were cold inside her shoes, because the cold had worked its way in through the gravel, and the standing frost on the highway edges. She did not say that she had not eaten anything since the bread and peanut butter early that morning, and that she was getting lightheaded in a way she was trying to manage carefully. She did not say any of that, because Iris did not need to hear it, and because saying it would give it more weight than it needed to have right now. She walked. At the mile that she would later estimate was the 11th or 12th, though she was not counting precisely, she became aware of a vehicle slowing behind her. She did not turn immediately. She had learned, years ago, that turning immediately signals something to certain kinds of people, and she was alone on a highway with a baby and a broken arm, and not enough of anything, and she was not going to signal anything she did not mean to. The vehicle slowed to a stop on the shoulder ahead of her, not behind her. That was important. It had pulled ahead and stopped, which was different from pulling up alongside. She registered this without showing that she had. A door opened. Footsteps on gravel. A voice. "Excuse me." She kept walking toward the stopped vehicle, because she was going north, and it was stopped to the north of her, and stopping herself felt wrong. She looked at the vehicle as she approached. It was a black four-door, clean, expensive-looking, but not ostentatious, the kind of vehicle that says something about the person who drives it without trying to say it. The man standing beside it was tall. He was wearing dark clothing, nothing remarkable, no insignia or marking that she could see. He was standing about 10 feet from the vehicle, not blocking her path, his hands visible at his sides. She registered all of this quickly, the assessment that comes from living the kind of life that requires you to read situations fast. He was an alpha. She could tell that from 10 feet away, the same way you can tell the temperature before you step outside. It is something in the air, something in how a person occupies the space around them. Normally on a day like this, in a situation like this, that information would have made her walk faster. But his hands were at his sides, open, fingers visible. He was not stepping toward her. He had gotten out of the car and positioned himself in a way that gave her room, and the expression on his face was not one she recognized as a threat. It was something more careful than that. "I saw you a few miles back," he said. "You have been walking a long time." She stopped about 8 feet from him. She looked at him directly, which she did on purpose. "I am going to Ashenvale," she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. He nodded once. He looked at her arm, at the elastic bandage, at the obvious way she was favoring it. He looked at Iris in the carrier, with an expression that was not readable, but was not alarmed either, which she noticed. "The buses on this route are down," he said. "I know," she said. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him, and he did not look away, which was interesting, because most people look away when they are being watched that directly. "I am going north," he said. "I can take you to Ashenvale. I will not drive faster than you are comfortable with. I will not ask you questions you do not want to answer. You can tell me to stop anywhere along the way, and I will stop." She looked at him. She looked at the car. She looked at the highway stretching ahead of her, another hour or more of walking at minimum, with her arm like this, and the cold, and Iris who would need to be fed soon. She said, "Who are you?" He said his name was Calum. He said it simply, without rank or title, just the name. She said, "Why did you stop?" He said, "Because you should not be out here like this." She said, "That is not a reason that belongs to you." He nodded at that, accepting it. "No," he said. "It does not, but it is why I stopped." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she said, "If I say stop, you stop." He said, "Yes." She said, "I need to sit in the back so I can tend to my daughter." He said, "Of course." She walked to the vehicle. He did not move to help her, which she appreciated, because she had not asked for help and she did not want to be handled. She opened the rear door herself, with her good arm, and she got in, and she settled Iris, and she put the backpack on the seat beside her. He got in the front. He started the vehicle. He pulled back onto Route 9 heading north. He did not speak. He turned the heat up slightly, without asking, which was either presumptuous or observant, and she decided, after a moment, that it was observant. Outside the window, Route 9 began to pass, the long miles she had been walking dissolving behind her now at the pace of something that had an engine, and she exhaled very slowly, carefully, the way you exhale when you have been holding your breath without knowing it. Iris made a small sound. Lena looked down at her, at the perfect sleeping face, and she pressed her lips against the top of her daughter's head, warm and close. She did not let her guard down. She was not someone who let her guard down quickly, and a stranger in a vehicle on a highway was not the time for that, regardless of how his hands had been open at his sides. But she also noticed that the back seat was warm, and the vehicle was smooth and quiet compared to the highway, and that the man in the front seat was doing exactly what he had said he would do, which was drive north, and not speak, and take up only the space he needed. She watched the road and she held Iris close, and she thought about Ashenvale and what might be waiting there, and she let herself, just barely, breathe. The drive that should have taken another hour on foot took 12 minutes by road. She was watching the mile markers, still counting, still calculating, when the vehicle slowed and the exit for Ashenvale came into view, and Calum took it without being asked, because she had told him that was her destination, and he had simply driven her there. She told him, as he merged onto the exit road, that she needed to go to the Coalition Resource Center. He said he knew where it was. She did not ask him why he knew where it was. Not yet. Some information arranges itself in the right order if you give it time. The resource center was a brick building set back from the road, with a parking area, and a small sign and lights on inside, even in the early morning. He parked in the lot, and he got out, and he opened her door, which surprised her, though he did it quickly, and stood back once it was done, not hovering. She got out. She stood in the parking lot with her backpack, and Iris in the carrier, and her arm, and her tiredness, and the full weight of this morning, and she looked at the building with its lit windows, and then she looked at Calum, who was standing a few feet away, holding what appeared to be a business card. "If you run into trouble here," he said, "or if anything they tell you is not what you need, call that number." She took the card. She looked at it. There was a number, and his name, and below his name, a line of text that she read twice before it fully registered. Alpha King of the Northern Coalition. She looked up from the card. She looked at him. He met her eyes, and did not apologize for it, or explain it, or make it smaller than it was. She said, "You did not tell me." He said, "You did not ask about rank. You asked about my name and why I stopped. I answered both of those things honestly. She held the card for a moment. Then she said, "Why did you really stop?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she would think about for a long time afterward. He said, "Because someone who carries that much alone deserves, at minimum, to be offered a choice." She looked at him for a long moment. Iris stirred against her chest, a small stretch, and a sigh. "Thank you," Lena said, and she walked toward the building. She did not look back, but she did not throw the card away. She put it in the front pocket of the backpack, next to her mother's photograph, next to the paper with Mabel's daughter's number on it, next to the notebook where she had been writing down every dollar spent and every road traveled, next to everything that mattered. Inside the resource center, a young woman at the front desk looked up when Lena came in and said good morning and asked her to sign in and take a seat, and Lena did both. The waiting room was warm. There were chairs with cushions. There was a table with paper cups and hot water and little packets of tea. Lena made herself a cup of tea. She sat down. She looked at the lit room around her, at the other women who were also sitting and waiting, each with their own story and their own version of the long road that led here. She looked at Iris, who was awake now, eyes open, looking around at the lights with the focused, serious expression of a baby encountering a new ceiling. "I know," Lena said softly. "New place." Iris blinked at the ceiling. Lena held her close. Outside, through the window, she could see the parking lot. The black vehicle was still there. She watched it. After about a minute, it moved slowly toward the exit, paused at the road, and then pulled away north, and was gone. She looked back at Iris. "All right," she said. "Let's find out what comes next." The woman at the desk called her name 20 minutes later. She stood up. She walked into the next room, where a woman with reading glasses and a kind, practical face sat behind a desk covered in folders. She was going to ask Lena about her situation. She was going to ask about housing and legal status and needs and history. She was going to take notes. She was going to make calls. She was going to set things in motion that Lena could not yet see or understand. Lena sat down. And she told her everything from the beginning. Not because it was easy, not because she trusted easily, or because the room felt entirely safe, or because she was not still carrying the accumulated weight of everything that had happened in the past months. She told her because it was time, because the story needed to be given somewhere it could actually do something, could be transformed from a weight into a record, from pain into paperwork that could open a door. She told her about Grey Hollow, about Darien and the council hall and the 30 seconds, about Mabel's house and the laundry work and the diner and the fall on the stairs, about the letter that arrived under the door, about the bus that did not come, about Route 9 in the early morning, the gravel shoulder, the cold, the counting of steps, the talking to Iris about crows and apple trees, and a grandmother named Rose. The woman with the reading glasses listened. She did not interrupt. She wrote things down carefully in her folder. When Lena finished, the woman set down her pen. She looked at Lena, and then at Iris, and then back at Lena. She said, "You are in the right place." Lena exhaled. It was a small exhale, barely a sound, but it carried a lot with it. "Good," she said. "Thank you." She did not cry. She had decided, somewhere on the highway, somewhere around the 11th mile, that she was not going to cry until she was somewhere safe and warm, and Iris was settled, and there was nothing urgent that needed to be done. She was going to allow herself that, but only then, and only once everything else was handled. There was still a long way to go. She knew that. There would be more forms and more waiting rooms, and more nights of tight calculation. There would be hard days ahead, different hard days than the ones behind her, but hard nonetheless, because that is the shape of starting over when you are starting from very little. But she had Iris. She had the card in her backpack pocket. She had the number for Mabel's daughter. She had the notebook and the photograph of Rose and the blue blanket folded inside the pack. She had $61, no, 81, she remembered, counting Mabel's gift. And she had a body that had carried her 11 miles on a broken arm, with a baby pressed against her heart, and had not stopped. She had all of that. She looked at the woman across the desk, who had picked up her pen again, and was already writing things down, already beginning the work of making something possible out of what had seemed impossible. She looked at Iris. She sat up straight in her chair. And she began. The first night in Ashenvale was in a room, at the Resource Center's emergency shelter, a small room on the second floor, with a proper bed and a bassinet that someone had already made up with clean sheets. Lena stood in the doorway for a moment when the staff member showed her to it, and she looked at the clean sheets and the bassinet and the lamp on the side table and the window with a curtain that actually moved in the right direction when you pulled the cord. She stood there and she breathed it in, this ordinary room with its ordinary things, and she felt something in her chest loosen that she had not known was as tight as it was. She put Iris down, and she sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at her hands. Her right hand was reddened from the cold of the morning, the skin dry along the knuckles. Her left hand, below the elastic bandage, was slightly swollen, in a way it had not been before, and the forearm above the wrist was a pain she was going to have to stop ignoring. She had been ignoring it with great discipline for 3 weeks. She had been telling herself it was a strain, a deep bruise, something that would resolve with rest and careful use. But lying to herself about physical pain was a skill that had a limited time frame, and she could feel that the limit was approaching. The next morning, a staff member at the resource center named Gloria, a calm, efficient woman in her 40s who wore sensible shoes and communicated primarily in lists, arranged for Lena to be seen at the Coalition medical facility attached to the center. It was not a large place, but it was well equipped, and it was free to center clients, which was the relevant fact. The doctor who saw her was a young man named Felix, who had the manner of someone very competent, who has decided that warmth is also important, and is working on combining the two. He looked at her arm carefully, asked her several questions about when and how the injury had happened, and then sent her for imaging. He came back 20 minutes later with the results and said, in a voice that was neither alarming nor gentle in a way that softened the information, that the radius had a fracture about 2 inches above the wrist that had not healed correctly, because it had not been immobilized at the time. He said it needed to be properly set and casted. He said the good news was that it had not displaced significantly. He said they could do it today. Lena said all right. He said it would be uncomfortable. She said she was acquainted with discomfort. He almost smiled at that. He said they would give her something for the pain, a mild option that was safe, given that she was nursing. She said that was fine. He said it would take about an hour, and then she would need to keep the cast dry and come back in 6 weeks. She said all right. She said she appreciated him telling her everything clearly. He said that was just how things should be done, and she agreed with him. Gloria watched Iris during the procedure, which took 55 minutes and was not comfortable, but was also not the worst thing Lena had been through, not by a long measure. When it was done, and the cast was set, and her arm was in a proper sling, and the modest painkiller was doing something useful in the background, she sat in the recovery area with a paper cup of water, and looked at her arm in its new weight of plaster, and felt a strange and involuntary relief, the kind that comes when a thing you have been managing through sheer will is finally being managed properly. She had been walking around on a broken bone for 3 weeks, while having a baby and losing her home and walking 11 miles on a highway. She thought about that for a moment, and then she decided not to think about it anymore, because it was done, and the bone was now in a cast, and what mattered was what happened from here. Gloria brought Iris back to her and sat down with a clipboard, which in Gloria's hands was less a clipboard and more a roadmap. She went through the available options at the center. The emergency shelter could accommodate Lena for up to 3 weeks, while longer-term placement was being arranged. There were several transitional housing options in Ashenvale that the center had partnerships with, and she was already making inquiries. There was also a legal aid referral available if Lena wanted to explore her rights regarding the formal rejection from Grey Hollow, which Gloria mentioned without pressure, simply as something that existed. Lena said she would think about the legal option. Gloria made a note. She said she was also interested in working. She said she did not intend to stay in the shelter system longer than she needed to. Gloria looked up from the clipboard. "What kind of work have you done?" she said. Lena told her. Domestic work, food preparation, laundry, general care. She said she was also good with organization and keeping records, which she had done informally, but could do formally. She said she learned quickly. Gloria made more notes. She said she would look into what was available. She said Lena should rest today and tomorrow, and then they would sit down again and go through things properly. Lena nodded. She looked at Iris, who had fallen asleep against Gloria's shoulder in the way that young babies fall asleep against warm strangers, trustingly and without complication. "She likes you," Lena said. Gloria looked down at the baby with an expression that briefly crossed into something warm before she gathered herself back to her clipboard. She is a good weight, she said, which Lena understood was Gloria's version of saying something tender. The days at the shelter moved with a different rhythm than the days at Mabel's house. There was structure here, meals at set times, check-ins with staff, a quiet hours rule at night. Lena found she appreciated the structure because it meant fewer decisions she had to make on her own, which left more of her attention for Iris and for healing and for the careful planning that was becoming her primary mode of living. Her arm in its cast was strange at first. She had to relearn how to hold Iris, how to dress herself, how to eat. She became more skilled with her right hand. She found that the cast, while cumbersome, also gave her a clear boundary. Other people at the shelter, and the staff, instinctively helped more when there was a visible, undeniable sign that she needed it, in the way that people often struggle to offer help to someone who appears to be managing, even when managing is costing that person everything. She did not like needing help. She was working on that. There were 4 other women at the shelter during that period. One of them, a soft-spoken woman named Harriet, had a daughter about a year older than Iris, and the 2 babies regarded each other across the common room with the grave solemnity of very small people encountering other very small people for the first time. Harriet and Lena did not become close friends in the way that takes months to build, but they became something useful, the kind of companions who share a specific situation and therefore understand each other without explanation. They ate breakfast together most mornings. They watched each other's children when the other needed a moment alone. That was enough, and it was good. On the 4th evening at the shelter, Lena sat on her bed after Iris was down, and she took the business card from her backpack pocket. She had been taking it out and looking at it and putting it back every day since the morning on the highway. She looked at it now. The name, the number, the line of text that she still found strange to look at. Alpha King of the Northern Coalition. She had not called. She was not sure what she would say. The man had given her a ride on a highway and told her to call if there was trouble. There had been no further trouble. There was nothing she needed from him specifically that the center was not already working to provide. There was no practical reason to call. She looked at the card for a long time. Then she put it back in her pocket and turned off the lamp. She thought about his hands, open at his sides, on the highway shoulder. She thought about the heat turned up without being asked. She thought about the way he had said, "Someone who carries that much alone deserves to be offered a choice." She thought about what it means to encounter someone who sees the situation accurately and responds accordingly, without making it about themselves or their own feelings about the situation. She had not encountered that very often. She did not know what he was or what his presence in her life was going to mean, if it was going to mean anything at all. She was too careful, too calibrated by everything that had happened, to let herself reach towards something she could not see clearly. But she kept the card. On the 5th day, Gloria came to see her with news. A local woman who had a small house on the east side of Ashenvale needed someone to help with general household tasks and occasional childcare for her young son. The woman was offering a room and a modest wage in exchange for the work. Gloria said it was not a permanent solution, but it was an excellent bridge, and the woman had already been vetted by the center and was known to be fair and decent. Lena said yes, before Gloria finished describing it. Gloria said she thought she would. The woman's name was Nora. She was in her mid-30s, raising her son Oliver alone after her partner had moved abroad for work 2 years earlier, and she was practical and straightforward in the way that single parents generally become practical and straightforward because they do not have a choice about it. She met Lena at the center on a Saturday morning, looked her over once in the same way Mabel had looked her over on a porch 4 months earlier, the honest appraisal of someone who needs to make a quick and accurate judgment, and said she had one rule, which was that the house was quiet after 8 in the evening, because Oliver needed to sleep. Lena said that was not a problem. Nora looked at Iris. She looked at the cast on Lena's arm. She said, "The cast should not be a problem for most of what needs doing. If something is too difficult, tell me, and we will figure it out." Lena said that sounded fair. Nora said, "Good. You can come Monday." She came Monday. The house was small but organized, a 2-story place with a garden in the back and a room on the upper floor that was modest but private, with a window that looked out over the garden. Oliver, who was 4, regarded Iris with extreme suspicion for the first 2 days, and then, on the third day, walked up to the basket where she was lying and held out a small wooden block as if offering a gift. Iris grabbed it with her whole hand and held it with a concentration that made Oliver laugh, a surprised, delighted sound. And after that they were fine. The work was manageable. Lena did what she could, with one arm properly and one in a cast, which turned out to be more than people generally expected. She cleaned, she organized, she prepared simple meals. She kept things running with the steady, practiced efficiency she had developed over months of making very little do very much. Nora watched her work sometimes, with an expression that was hard to read, and then would say something brief and accurate, like, "You are good at this," or, "That was better than how I had it before," which were the kinds of compliments that Lena valued most, the ones that were true. She called the number on the business card on a Tuesday evening, 6 days after she had arrived at the shelter. She was sitting in Nora's kitchen after dinner, Iris asleep upstairs, the house quiet around her, and she had taken the card out again and she was tired of taking it out and putting it back. She dialed the number. He picked up on the third ring. She said, "This is Lena Maris. You drove me to Ashenvale." He said, "I know." There was a brief silence, in which she tried to assemble a reason for the call that was clear and purposeful, and not simply the honest one, which was that she had been thinking about what he had said on the highway, and she did not know what to do with it. She could not find a clear and purposeful reason, so she said the honest thing instead. She said, "Why did you say what you said? About someone who carries too much alone?" He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Because it was true." She said, "A lot of things are true. People do not usually say them." He said, "No, they do not." Another silence. She looked at the kitchen wall. She said, "I wanted to let you know that the resource center was helpful. I am in a better situation now." He said, "I am glad." She said, "I am not calling because I need anything." He said, "I know." She said, "I am calling because you did something decent on a very difficult morning, and I think decent things should be acknowledged." He said, "Thank you for saying that." She said, "All right. Good night." He said, "Good night, Lena." She hung up. She sat in the kitchen for a moment with the phone in her hand and the card on the table in front of her. Then she put the card back in her pocket, and she went upstairs, and she checked on Iris, and she went to sleep. It was a very ordinary phone call. Nothing about it was dramatic or remarkable, except for the fact that she had made it, which required something from her that she did not have an easy name for. Something between trust and the willingness to begin, which are closely related but not exactly the same thing. She slept well that night, the kind of sleep that comes when something that has been held tightly is very slightly released. She did not know, as she slept, that the photograph from the highway had already circulated on 2 regional networks, shared by the motorist who had taken it without stopping, captioned with a question that was intended to locate her. She did not know that the image, a young woman with a wrapped arm and a baby bundled against her chest, walking the shoulder of Route 9 in the early morning fog, had been recognized by someone in Gray Hollow. She did not know that by the time she was making her phone call from Nora's kitchen, the image had reached the Pack Council, and that Darian Cole had seen it, and that the Pack elders were beginning a conversation about what to do with the public attention it was generating. She would find out soon enough. But that night she did not know, and the not knowing was a mercy, and she slept. The photograph arrived in Gray Hollow's awareness, the way most things do in small communities. Not as a single piece of news, but as a current that moved through conversations and glances, and the particular kind of knowing, without saying, that tight communities have developed over years. Someone had shared it. Someone had recognized the elastic bandage, or the coat, or some specific quality of posture that you only notice in someone you have seen regularly for years. And then someone had named her. And once a name was attached to the image, it moved very quickly. The caption attached to the photograph said, "Saw this woman walking Route 9 North with a baby this morning. Anyone know if she made it okay?" It was a genuine question from someone who felt guilty about not stopping, which was more honesty than Lena would have expected. The question had hundreds of responses by the time it reached Gray Hollow's awareness, and the responses were not, overwhelmingly, kind to the people Lena had left behind. Darian Cole saw the post through a network contact. He had been, by all appearances, living his life in Gray Hollow in the period since the rejection, which is to say, he had continued doing exactly what he was doing before, attending assemblies, working within the pack hierarchy, moving toward the leadership position he had cited as the reason Lena's bloodline was insufficient. He had not asked about her. He had not sent anything. He had treated the ending of their bond with the same careful blankness he had worn in the council hall, as if she were a decision that had been made and filed and could now be considered resolved. The photograph made it harder to consider anything resolved. He looked at the image, the highway, the gravel shoulder, the fog, the woman with the broken arm and the baby, and he understood immediately that the conversation around this image was not going to be manageable through silence. People in the comments were asking who she was. People were asking what pack she had come from. People were asking who was responsible for a nursing mother being alone on a highway with a fractured arm, carrying an infant because she had nowhere else to go. The answers were arriving one by one, because the internet, once it is interested in a question, is very efficient at finding answers. He went to Elder Gorman. Elder Gorman looked at the post for a long time, and then he looked at Darian, and he said, in the measured tone of someone who is choosing words carefully, because the wrong ones will make things worse, that a statement would need to be issued. He said the framing mattered. He said they should characterize the situation as a mutual agreement between two people who had determined their bond was not serving either of them, which was, in Elder Gorman's particular version of truth, a way of saying that what had happened was not what it clearly was. Darian said that sounded right. He said he wished Lena well, which was also a kind of truth, insofar as he genuinely did not wish her ill. He had simply made a calculation, weighed things against each other, and arrived at a decision. He had thought, in that way that people sometimes think when they make difficult decisions about other people's lives, that she would land somewhere, that people do, that the world generally provides for those who need it. He had not thought carefully about what providing for yourself looks like when you are 5 months pregnant and have $40 in a small bag and a bus ticket to nowhere specific. He was not by nature a person who thought carefully about things that were not immediately in front of him, and Lena had not been immediately in front of him for months. The pack issued a statement on a Wednesday. It was written in careful, neutral language, and it said that Lena Maris had parted ways with Gray Hollow Settlement by mutual agreement and had been wished well. It said the pack held no position on her personal circumstances and wished her a positive future. It said that the settlement maintained its policies regarding pack alignment and member well-being in accordance with its traditional values. The statement was not received well. This was perhaps not surprising, given that the image of a woman walking a highway with a broken arm and a newborn is not easily softened by words like mutual agreement and traditional values. The comments that followed were pointed. Some were articulate, some were not. All of them carried the same essential message, which was that something had gone wrong in Gray Hollow, and the statement was not an explanation of that wrong, but an attempt to cover it. It was in the middle of this that Calum Voss's office received a formal inquiry from the Gray Hollow elders. The inquiry was addressed to the Northern Coalition's administrative secretary. It noted that an Alpha King rank individual had reportedly become involved with a former member of Gray Hollow Settlement. It expressed in the specific language that packs use when they wish to object to something without quite stating that they are objecting, that this involvement was a matter of concern with respect to internal pack sovereignty, and the precedent such involvement might set for coalition interference in settlement-level decisions. It was, in the plainest possible terms, a complaint about the fact that Calum had stopped on a highway and given someone a ride to a resource center. Calum read the inquiry on a Thursday morning. He set it on his desk. He looked at it for a moment. Then he picked up a pen, and he wrote a response himself, which was unusual. Such responses were normally handled by his administrative team. He wrote it in full, by hand, and then had it transcribed and sent through official channels. The response was 3 pages. It cited, specifically and with section numbers, the Northern Coalition's Interpack Welfare Codes, which were not advisory documents but binding agreements that all settlements under coalition jurisdiction, including Gray Hollow, had formally signed. It outlined the specific provisions that apply to displaced pack members, particularly those in vulnerable circumstances. It noted that a nursing mother with an untreated fracture walking a major highway with an infant constituted, under Section 12 of the Welfare Codes, a reportable welfare failure, and that the settlement of origin bore documented responsibility for that failure. It noted that the Alpha King had not interfered in Grey Hollow's internal affairs. He had provided transportation to a coalition resource center for an individual in need, which was both his right and his obligation, under the same codes the settlement had agreed to uphold. It concluded by stating that the coalition would be opening a routine compliance review of Grey Hollow's welfare practices, which was a procedural outcome of any documented welfare failure and had nothing to do with personal circumstances, which was true, and also very efficient. The letter from Elder Gorman that came in response was brief. It said the settlement would cooperate with any review. It said no further statements would be issued on the matter. It did not reference Darian Cole. Darian Cole said nothing publicly. He went about his life. The comments online continued for a while and then moved on to other things, as online conversations do, because the world is full of situations that generate feeling for a short time and then are swallowed by the next thing that generates feeling. But Lena did not know most of this when it was happening. She was in Nora's house, with the cast on her arm and Iris growing, and Oliver deciding she was acceptable, and the routine of the house organizing itself around her, in the way routines do when you show up for them consistently and with care. She was sleeping better. She was eating more regularly. The arm was healing. She had called the legal aid referral and had a first appointment scheduled for 2 weeks out, and she did not yet know what that would produce, but she was willing to find out. She knew about the photograph because Gloria from the resource center called to tell her, on the Thursday afternoon when the PAC's statement had just been issued, and the coalition compliance review had just been initiated. Gloria said she wanted Lena to know before she heard it from somewhere else. She said the center was prepared to support her through any process that followed. She said Lena did not have to do anything right now, except to know that the situation was being handled at a level that was appropriate to its actual seriousness. Lena sat in Nora's kitchen for the second time in as many weeks, the phone in her hand, listening to Gloria's list of facts. She thought about the council hall in Grey Hollow. She thought about the 30 seconds. She thought about Elder Gorman's careful, rehearsed words, and the 20 pairs of eyes that would not quite meet hers. She thought about the highway and the photograph taken by a person in a moving vehicle who could not be bothered to stop but could be bothered to take a picture, and how that image had traveled farther than she had and arrived somewhere she had not expected it to go. She thought about Calum, in his office, writing a 3-page response by hand. She said, to Gloria, "What happens now?" Gloria said the compliance review would take several weeks. She said it was procedural, and Lena did not need to participate unless she chose to. She said the legal appointment would help Lena understand her own options and rights, independent of whatever the coalition did. Lena said, "Is there anything I need to do right now?" Gloria said no. She said Lena should eat and rest and let her arm heal. Lena said that sounded like the best idea she had heard in a long time. She hung up. She sat in the kitchen. Oliver came in from the garden with mud on his knees and a look of complete innocence that fooled no one, and Lena told him to take off his shoes before he went upstairs, and he did, and the smallness and normalcy of that exchange was exactly what she needed in that moment. She was not all right. Not entirely. Not yet. What had happened in Grey Hollow had left a mark in her that was not going to simply close over. You do not stand in a hall and hear yourself declared insufficient in front of the people you have lived among for 3 years, and walk away without carrying something from it. She knew that. She was not pretending otherwise. But she was also here, in a warm kitchen, in a house with a creaking stair that she had learned to avoid, and a 4-year-old who had begun allowing her to read to him at bedtime, and a daughter who was growing and healthy, and would, in a few more weeks, begin smiling in a real and deliberate way, rather than the reflexive kind. She was here, and Grey Hollow was there, and the distance between those two things was growing every day. She looked at the kitchen window. The garden outside was beginning to stir with early spring, the first green things pushing through the turned soil, with the specific stubbornness of living things that are not interested in waiting for a more convenient season. She thought about the apple tree at Mabel's house. She thought about the buds she had seen on the branches the last morning she was there, small and green and entirely certain of themselves. She got up. She put the kettle on. There was still a lot ahead. There would be the legal appointment and the compliance review and the longer road to something that looked like settled and stable. There would be days that were harder than this one, and moments when the weight of it all returned in full. She did not pretend otherwise. But right now there was tea to make, and Oliver would be back downstairs in 3 minutes, with clean knees and a demand for something to eat, and Iris would wake from her nap in about half an hour, and the garden outside was deciding to be spring. Lena filled the kettle. She chose the next thing. And she kept going. The spring moved forward the way spring does in the north, not cleanly or all at once, but in starts, with cold mornings giving way to warm afternoons, and then returning to cold again, the weather unable to commit, the world in the slow business of changing one layer at a time. Lena marked the weeks, not by weather, but by Iris, by the first time her daughter focused on her face, with clear, deliberate intention, by the first genuine smile, not the reflex kind, but the kind that reached her eyes. By the morning, Iris grabbed Lena's finger and held it so firmly that Lena had to stop what she was doing and just stand there, looking down at the small, perfect hand. She had her legal appointment on a Wednesday in the second week of April. The legal aid office was in a low building 2 streets from the resource center, and the man who saw her was a young lawyer named Dale, who had the look of someone who had chosen his work because he cared about it, rather than because it was lucrative, which tends to produce a particular kind of focused attention. He listened carefully. He asked his questions in a logical order, writing in a small notebook with a pen that he kept clicking, a nervous habit she recognized from people who think fast. He told her several things. He told her that the formal rejection, as it had been conducted in Grey Hollow, had procedural irregularities under the Interpack welfare codes she was entitled to. She had not been given formal notice before the assembly. She had not been offered any form of transitional support as required by Section 8 of those codes, and her documented status as pregnant at the time of the rejection triggered additional protections that the settlement had not observed. He said that none of this guaranteed a specific outcome, but that she had grounds, and that those grounds were meaningful. He said he would need to gather documentation. He said it would take time. He said she should not expect anything to move quickly, because these processes do not move quickly, but that slow and correct was better than fast and ineffective. She said she understood. She asked him, before she left, what the most likely outcome was. He said it was too early to predict specifics, but that at minimum, the documentation process would create a formal record that the rejection had been improperly conducted, and that this record would be held in the coalition's welfare registry. He said that had both practical and protective value. It meant that if Grey Hollow ever attempted to pursue any formal claims regarding Iris's status or custody within the pack structure, there was an existing counter-record that would be considered in that process. Lena had not thought about that. About the possibility of Grey Hollow pursuing anything regarding Iris. She went quiet for a moment, and Dale watched her carefully, and then he said quickly that there was no current indication of any such intent, and that the mention was simply for her awareness, so that she understood the full value of what the documentation would do. She nodded. She thanked him. She walked out into the April morning, with her cast catching the early light, and her mind doing the methodical sorting she did when new information arrived, filing it, categorizing it, weighing it against the other things she knew. She was not afraid, exactly. She had passed the point where fear operated as a primary response, replaced by something more useful, a careful and wide attention to what was actually happening, and what steps logically followed. She had learned this in the past months, the way you learn things when there is no alternative, through the long practice of having to. She walked back to Nora's house. Oliver was at his day program until 3. Nora was at work. The house was quiet with the particular quality of afternoon quiet in spring, and Lena settled Iris in the small padded chair in the living room. Iris had recently developed opinions about lying on her back, and preferred to be propped up slightly so she could see more of the world, which Lena respected, and she sat at the kitchen table, and she wrote in her notebook. She wrote down what Dale had said, in her own clear shorthand. She wrote down the section numbers he had mentioned, and the word irregularities, which she underlined. She wrote a list of the documentation she would need to gather. She drew a line under that and wrote a second list. Things to watch for, things to prepare for, things to ask at the next appointment. She was building something, she realized. Not in a dramatic way, not a grand project with a visible shape, but something real nonetheless. A record, a foundation, the slow accumulation of facts and rights and knowledge that was different from the precarious position she had been in 8 months ago when she walked out of that council hall with $40 and Clara Dutton's handwritten address in her pocket. She closed the notebook. Iris made a small, interested sound from the living room, and Lena got up and went to see what had captured her attention this time. It was the light through the curtain, the way it moved across the floor in the afternoon wind, and Iris was watching it with the gravity of someone witnessing something important. Lena sat down beside her. "I know," she said. "Light is remarkable." Iris looked at her with dark, serious eyes, and then looked back at the light. Calum called that evening. She had not given him her new number, and for a moment she was startled, and then she remembered that she had given it to the resource center, and that Gloria had asked, when updating her contact information, whether there was anyone she wanted added to the approved contact list, and Lena had, without thinking very carefully about it, added his name. She picked up. He said he had heard from Gloria that the legal appointment had gone well. He said he wanted to check in, not to interfere, just to ask how she was. She said the appointment had been useful. She said she was managing. He said, "That is not the same as all right." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "No, it is not." He said, "Is there anything you need that is not being covered?" She thought about that seriously, the way she thought about things he asked her, which was with the same care she thought about things that mattered. She said she did not think so. She said the cast came off in 2 weeks, which she was looking forward to. She said Iris was growing and healthy. She said Nora was a decent person, and the arrangement was working. He said that was good. She said, "The review of Grey Hollow. I found out about it this week." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I am sorry you found out in the way you did. I should have told you directly." She said, "Yes, you should have." He said, "You are right. I will not do that again." There was a silence that was not awkward. She looked at the window, at the dark garden outside. She said, "What happens after the review?" He said the review would produce a report. He said the report would be submitted to the Coalition Welfare Registry. He said there might be formal requirements placed on Grey Hollow regarding their welfare protocols going forward. He said it was not about punishment, it was about accountability, which he knew sounded like a thing people say but in this case was also true. She said, "And Darian." He said, "Darian Cole did not violate the welfare codes himself. The Settlements Council did, in how they handled the process. He made a personal decision about a bond, which is within his rights under coalition law, regardless of the circumstances. The ethics of how he made it and what he considered are separate from the legal process." She said, "I know that. I am not asking about the legal process." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I cannot tell you anything about him that you do not already know better than I do." She appreciated that. He had not tried to fill the space with false reassurance. He had said the true thing, which was that she understood Darian better than any outsider could, and that the things she was going to have to come to terms about him were things only she could come to terms with. She said, "All right." They talked for a few more minutes about small things, Oliver's mud habit, which she had mentioned in a previous call, and a situation at the Coalition Summit that he described briefly and dryly, and that she laughed at, because it was genuinely funny, a complicated administrative absurdity, of the kind that only institutions can produce. The laugh surprised her. It came out before she decided whether to let it, which was how real laughs tend to arrive. She noticed that he let the laugh exist without commenting on it, without saying something that would make her conscious of it. He just moved forward in the story he was telling, and she appreciated that too. After she hung up, she sat for a while in the quiet kitchen. She turned the phone over in her hand a few times. She thought about the card in her pocket, which was getting soft at the edges from being taken out and put back so many times over the past weeks. She thought about what was building, what she could not yet name or define, but could feel the shape of, the way you feel the warmth from a fire before you actually turn toward it. She was being careful. She was not going to rush toward something just because it was warm. She had learned, in the most direct possible way, that warmth offered in a certain context does not always mean what it appears to mean, and she was not the kind of person who forgot lessons like that. But she was also not the kind of person who refused to feel what she felt. She had too much respect for honesty, for the truth of things, to perform an indifference she did not have. She was paying attention. That was what she was doing. She was watching, and listening, and being honest with herself about what she saw and heard, and she was taking it slowly, because slowly was the only way she trusted right now. That was enough. For this season, for this chapter, it was enough. The cast came off on a Friday in the last week of April. The doctor, not Felix this time, but a brisk woman named Harriet who moved fast and spoke in sentences like telegrams, removed it efficiently, and examined the healed bone with the practiced attention of someone who does this many times a day and takes professional satisfaction in doing it right. She said the radius had healed well. She said the alignment was good. She said Lena would experience some stiffness and reduced strength in the arm for several weeks, which was normal, and she should do the specific exercises on the sheet she was being handed, and she should come back in a month. Lena left the clinic with her arm bare and lighter than it had been in 6 weeks, and she stood outside on the pavement and turned her hand over slowly, looking at the pale skin where the cast had been, the definition of each bone visible in a way it had not been before, and she flexed her fingers carefully, feeling the stiffness, and underneath it the fundamental usefulness of having the use of her arm again, properly, without the weight. She walked home by a longer route than necessary. She went past the resource center and looked at its lit windows from the outside, remembering how it had appeared from the parking lot on the morning in January, when she had walked toward it from the highway, from Calum's vehicle, from Route 9, and the long gravel shoulder, and the 11 miles, and everything before that. She stood in front of it for a moment, not going in, just looking. You do not mark the moments when your life turns, usually. They look like ordinary mornings at the time. They look like bus schedules that fail, and shelters that are full, and decisions made on frozen highway shoulders. They do not announce themselves as turning points. You only recognize them from the other side, when you can look back down the road and see the shape of where you turned. She looked at the building for a moment, then she walked on. Nora was in the kitchen when she got home, making something on the stove that smelled of onions and garlic, and Oliver was at the table drawing with crayons and explaining the drawing to Iris, who was in her bouncy chair, and listening with the serious expression she brought to all Oliver's explanations. When Lena came in, Oliver looked up and said, "Lena, I am telling Iris about dinosaurs." And Lena said, "How is she taking it?" And Oliver considered this seriously, and said, "She seems interested," which made Nora laugh quietly over the stove. This was what Lena had built here. This ordinary kitchen, this small warmth, these people who had become, without ceremony or announcement, the texture of her daily life. She sat down at the table and held out her bare arm to Oliver, who looked at it with great interest and said, "Where is the white thing?" She said the white thing was done, that the arm was better now. He said, "Does it hurt?" She said a little, but less than before. He nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to his dinosaur drawing. She looked at Iris, who looked back at her, with those dark eyes that were getting more expressive every week, and Lena thought for the 100th time, "You are going to be all right, both of us. We are going to be all right." The summer arrived in the way summers do when you have been through a difficult winter, with a gratitude that is almost physical. Lena felt the first genuinely warm morning like a change in pressure, a shift from the long months of cold and enduring into something that breathed more easily. She opened the window in her room and smelled the garden, and Iris, who was now 5 months old and making sounds that were approaching the shape of language, looked at the open window with an expression of complete delight that Lena recognized because she felt it too. The legal process had moved forward steadily in the way Dale had said it would, slowly, correctly. There had been 2 more appointments, more documents gathered, statements taken. The compliance review of Grey Hollow had produced its report, which had been submitted to the registry. Dale said the formal notation of the procedural irregularities was now on record and permanent. He said it was not a dramatic outcome, it was not a reversal or a punishment, but it was a fact now in a way it had not been before, and facts in a record have a kind of durability that nothing else has. She had thought a lot about what she wanted from the process. She had gone into it imagining that she would feel something like vindication when the documentation was complete, that official acknowledgement would produce a specific feeling she could point to and say, "That is it, that is what I needed." Instead, what she found was something quieter. The documentation was useful, the record mattered, but the thing that had shifted inside her was not produced by any piece of paper. It had been produced by the months themselves, by Mabel, and the apple tree, and Nora's kitchen, and Oliver explaining dinosaurs, and the resource center's lit windows, in the January dark, and a man who had turned up the heat in a car, without being asked, and said, "Someone who carries that much alone deserves to be offered a choice." It had been produced by her own consistent choosing of the next step, day after day, even when the next step was hard and she was tired, and the calculation kept coming up short. She had built something. It was modest, and it was real, and it was hers. Calum came to Ashenvale in the second week of June. He did not announce it as a visit specifically. He said there was a coalition meeting in the district, and he would be in the area, and he asked, carefully and without pressure, whether she would be willing to meet for coffee. She said yes. They met at a small place on the main street, the kind of cafe with mismatched chairs, and good light, and a menu written in chalk on a board. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with his hands around a cup, and he stood when she came in, and then seemed to check himself, as if he had done it automatically, and then was not sure whether it was the right register, and she found this specific small uncertainty the most human thing she had seen from him, and it made her more comfortable than anything else could have. She sat down. She ordered tea. Iris was in a sling against her chest, awake, and taking in the cafe with her usual alert attention to everything. He looked at Iris for a moment. She has gotten bigger, he said. Babies generally do, Lena said. He almost smiled. She has your eyes. Lena looked down at Iris. She had thought that too, and found it startling each time, that a person could exist who had her eyes, who was made in part from her, who would carry some piece of her forward into a future she could not yet see. She does, she said. They talked, not about Grey Hollow, not about the legal process or the review or the coalition. They talked about Nora and Oliver and the dinosaur drawing, which she described, and he laughed when she told him Oliver had concluded that Iris was interested. They talked about Ashenvale, which he knew well from years of coalition work, and she described the parts of it she had come to know, the market on Saturdays, the walking path along the river that she went to in the mornings when it was warm, the way the light came through Nora's garden in the late afternoon and made everything look like something worth painting. She told him about her plans. She said she had spoken to Gloria about coming on as a staff member at the resource center, in intake and support for newly arrived clients, once she had finished her current arrangement with Nora, which was going to wind down naturally when Oliver started full-time schooling in autumn. She said the center had a training process, and the compensation was modest, but it was honest work she believed in. She said she thought she was ready for it. He listened to all of this with the same quality of attention he had given to things from the beginning, not filling the spaces before she was finished, not redirecting the conversation toward himself when she paused. Just listening, in the way that people listen when they are genuinely interested in what is being said. When she finished, he said, "That sounds right for you." She said, "You have known me for 6 months, and most of it at a distance." He said, "I know. I am saying it sounds right from what I have seen." She looked at him across the table. She said, "Can I ask you something direct?" He said yes. She said, "What is this? What you are doing? Coming here, the calls, all of it. What is it for you?" "I have been doing many things I am required to do for a long time, and some of them matter, and some of them are simply the weight of the position. This is not that." She said, "What is it then?" He said, "I want to know you. I want to be someone you can trust. I want to see what you build, because I think it is going to be worth seeing." He paused again. "And I am aware that I need to be patient about all of that, because you have had good reasons to stop trusting people, and you are not wrong to move slowly. And I would rather move slowly in the right direction than quickly, in a way that damages something that could be worth more." She looked at him for a long moment. Iris, against her chest, made a small sound of contentment, the kind that meant she was warm and fed and exactly where she wanted to be. Lena said, "That is a very careful answer." He said, "It is an honest answer." She said, "I know." She looked at her tea. She said, "I am not ready for something that requires a lot from me yet. I am still putting things together." He said, "I know that." She said, "If you are going to be patient, I need you to actually be patient. Not the kind that is waiting for something and building resentment about it. Actually patient." He said, "Yes." She said, "All right." She picked up her tea. "Tell me something about you that is not about the coalition or pack politics. Something ordinary." He thought for a moment. Then he told her he was a poor sleeper, had been since he was young, and that he had read every book in the small library of his childhood home by the time he was 12, because the nights were very long when you could not sleep. He told her he had a habit of underestimating cooking times, which meant everything he made himself came out either undercooked or rescued at the last second by urgency. He told her he had once, at 16, fallen into a river in front of a large number of people, while trying to appear competent about something he was not in any way competent about, and that this had been formative. She laughed at the river story. She did not hold it back this time, she just let it come, and it was a real laugh, the kind that takes something from you and gives something back. He watched her laugh, and his expression was warm, in a way he did not try to moderate. She looked at him. She said, "Okay. Just that. Just, okay." He understood what it meant, without requiring her to expand on it. That was something, she thought. That willingness to understand, without requiring explanation. It was not a small thing. They finished their coffee and their tea. They walked out into the June morning together, and the sun was doing something genuinely fine, with the light on the old buildings of the main street, and Iris was awake and looking at everything. He walked with her to the corner, where her route home diverged from his. He said he would be in the district again in 3 weeks. He asked whether she would be open to this again. She said yes. She walked home along the route that passed the resource center. She stopped in front of it for the second time, this time with the morning sun on the brick and the windows lit from inside. She looked at it for a moment. She thought about the January morning when she had come through that door, with the cast and the highway and the backpack and the $61 and Iris in the sling, and everything she had just come through packed behind her. She thought about the woman at the front desk who had said good morning, and asked her to sign in and take a seat, the ordinary courtesy of it, the utter normalcy, and how much she had needed ordinary and normal after the extraordinary difficulty of the morning. She thought about what it would mean to be that person. The one who says good morning when someone comes in from the highway, the one who knows that the cup of tea and the waiting room and the simple courtesy of being received without judgment is not a small thing. It is, sometimes, the thing that makes the difference between a person continuing and a person not continuing. She thought about Gloria, with her clipboard and her sensible shoes and her way of naming what needed to happen next, with a calm that felt like bedrock. She thought about Dale, clicking his pen, writing in his notebook, asking questions in the right order. She thought about Felix, who said it was just how things should be done. She wanted to do that. She wanted to be someone who does it right, who is present when someone comes in from wherever their highway was, who offers the next step clearly and without condition. She had not intended for her life to arrive at this specific point when she packed 2 bags in a house in Grey Hollow 8 months ago. She had not been moving toward a resource center in Ashenvale in the direction she was moving toward anything. She had simply been moving forward, choosing the next visible point, walking through the fog on a highway shoulder, keeping herself and Iris going. And the road had brought her here. The morning moved around her, people passing, the ordinary business of a city on an ordinary day. None of them aware that the woman standing on this pavement had walked 11 miles on a broken arm in January, with a baby against her heart, and had arrived here, and had, slowly and carefully and through the accumulated effort of every small choice, made something out of it. They would not need to know. That was the thing about the kind of strength that is built through difficulty. It does not announce itself. It shows up on a Tuesday morning when someone needs a cup of tea and a person who says good morning and means it, and it does not explain itself. Iris stirred against her chest, a small stretch, her face turned toward the warmth. Lena pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head. Then she turned toward home, toward Oliver and his dinosaurs and Nora's kitchen and the garden coming fully into summer, all of it ordinary and warm and hers. She walked. The year that followed was a quiet year, by the measure of everything that had come before. That is not to say it was without difficulty, because no year is, but the difficulties were of a different order now. The manageable kind, the kind that have solutions, or at least processes, the kind that do not require 11 miles on a highway shoulder to address. Lena started at the resource center in October, 2 months after Oliver began school, and her arrangement with Nora wound down naturally and warmly, with a last dinner together and a drawing Oliver made of all of them, which featured Iris as a large oval and everyone else as stick figures of varying heights, and which Lena kept folded in her notebook. She started in the intake and support role that Gloria had described to her, and she was good at it almost immediately, not because she had formal training, but because she had come in from the outside, and knew with exact precision what it felt like to be on the other side of that desk. She knew what it felt like to need someone to say, "You are in the right place." She knew what it felt like when the right information arrived in the right order and the cup of tea was already there. She knew what it felt like when someone asked whether you had somewhere to go, the way Clara Dutton had asked her on a stone wall in Grey Hollow before she had anything arranged. She brought all of that to the work. She brought the careful attention, and the honest directness, and the willingness to sit in the quiet of someone's hard situation, without rushing them past it. Women came in from various roads, some more literal than hers, some less, and she received each one the way she had needed to be received, without judgment, without making the story too large or too small, without performing sympathy in a way that was actually about her own discomfort with someone else's pain. Gloria watched her work and said, at the end of her first month, "You were the right person for this." And Lena understood that this was Gloria's version of saying something important. Iris began to sit up on her own in November. She began to pull herself forward on the playmat in December, in a determined crawling attempt that was more enthusiasm than coordination, but was absolutely going somewhere. By February she was properly mobile, which rearranged the architecture of every room she was in, because she was interested in everything, and had no understanding of which things were not meant for her. Oliver, on one of his visits with Nora to Lena's new small apartment, watched Iris methodically pull every book from the bottom shelf and said, with the gravity of a person who has been down this road before, "She is going to be trouble." Lena said, "Good." The apartment was on the third floor of a building on the east side of Ashenvale, small but with good light, and a view over the rooftops that she liked in the mornings. She had found it through the center's housing network, a rent that was manageable on her salary, and she had moved in with Iris and 2 bags and everything she had accumulated in the months at Nora's house, which was not very much but was more than she had arrived with, which was a kind of accounting she paid attention to. She had put her mother's photograph on the windowsill in the new apartment, the same way she had in every room before this one. Always the first thing placed. Always on the windowsill where the light would reach it in the morning. She had looked at it on the first night in the new apartment and said, out loud, to the empty room, "I think you would like Ashenvale." She thought her mother probably would. Calum came to Ashenvale every few weeks. Sometimes for coalition business, sometimes not. They had coffee again, and then they had dinner, and then they had long walks along the river path that Lena liked in the mornings, and the shape of what it was became clearer over time, without requiring either of them to name it before it was ready to be named. He met Iris properly in November, sitting on Lena's kitchen floor at her invitation, which was a deliberate and considered thing. She had thought about when to introduce them and under what circumstances, and what she was communicating by doing so, and she had decided when she was ready, and not before. Iris looked at him with enormous seriousness for about 30 seconds, and then reached out and grabbed his ear, which was apparently satisfactory as an introduction, because she did not let go for a while. He held very still. Lena watched from the doorway with an expression she did not try to manage. The legal process concluded in the spring. Dale called her on a Thursday morning to tell her the formal record was complete and lodged. He said the notation stood, that Grey Hollow's welfare protocols had been found to be in procedural non-compliance at the time of her rejection, and that the record was now permanent in the coalition registry. He said there were no further actions required from her unless she chose to pursue additional claims, which she had the right to do, but was not obligated to. She said she did not think she would pursue anything further. He said he thought that was probably a reasonable decision. She said thank you. She said she meant it. He said he knew she did. He said it had been a privilege to work with her, which was the formal version of saying something warmer than that. She hung up, and she sat with it for a moment. This ending, that was really just a confirmation of things that had already shifted, the way endings often are. The notation in the registry was not going to change what had happened in the council hall. It was not going to give her back the 3 years she had spent in Grey Hollow, or the version of the future she had been building when she was still inside it. It was not going to make the morning on the highway not have happened, or the boarding house, or Mabel, or the fractured bone she had walked 11 miles on. But it was a fact now. It was true in the official way, that things become true when they are recorded, when someone writes them down and the record stands. And that mattered, not because she needed it to validate what she already knew, but because the record existed for the women who came after her, for the system that was supposed to protect them, for the version of things that Gray Hollow would have to live with, now that it was documented. She thought about Clara Dutton sitting on the stone wall with her. She thought about what Clara had said about strength. She thought that Clara, wherever she was, would probably understand why the notation mattered, even if it was quiet, even if it was just words in a folder, in a registry somewhere, that most people would never look at. It mattered. She got up. She went to work. In April, 1 year and 3 months after the morning on Route 9, a journalist named Peter Galway found her. He had been following the thread of the highway photograph since the previous year, the kind of investigation that starts with a single image and unfolds through connections and cross-references and months of patient inquiry. He reached her through the resource center, where she now worked, and his request was polite and specific. He was writing a piece about the welfare codes and their application to displaced omegas, and the photograph on Route 9 had become a touchstone for the issue. He would like, if she was willing, to speak with her. She thought about it for a week. She talked to Dale, who said she had no legal obligation either way. She talked to Gloria, who said the visibility could be useful for the center's work and the broader issue, but that Lena's own comfort was the first consideration. She talked to Calum, who said the choice was hers entirely, and that he would support whatever she decided. She decided to speak with him. The interview took place on a Saturday afternoon in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the center. Peter Galway was a quiet, careful man with the kind of listening skill that good journalists develop over years of needing to understand things quickly. He had done his research. He had the facts largely correct. What he did not have was what it had felt like from the inside, which is never something you can find in documents. She told him. She told him about the morning in the council hall and the 30 seconds and the walk to the stone wall and Clara's words. She told him about the bus and the boarding house and the arm she had broken, and then walked 11 miles on. She told him about the highway and the photograph she had not known was being taken, and the morning she had arrived in Ashenvale with a cast and $61 and a daughter who was now almost 16 months old and pulling every book off every available shelf. She told him what she wanted people to understand. He asked her, at the end, and she had been thinking about the answer since she agreed to the interview, and when it came time to say it, it was simple. She said, "I want people to understand that the highway happened because I had to do it. There was no choice, except to do it, or to stop, and stopping was not an option. I am not extraordinary. What happened on Route 9 was not bravery. It was just what was available to me. What I want people to think about is not the woman on the highway. It is how many women are on various versions of that highway right now, and whether the systems that are supposed to catch them are actually catching them." She paused. Then she said, "And also, I am all right. I want people to know that too. Because the story does not end on the highway. I walked off of it." Peter Galway looked at her for a moment. He wrote something in his notebook. He said, "Can I ask how?" She said, "1 step at a time. The same way you do anything that is very long." The article ran the following month. It was careful and accurate, and it used the highway photograph with her permission, and it told the story from the morning in the council hall through the resource center to the present, and it named the welfare code irregularities, and cited the registry notation, and quoted Lena at the end with the words she had said in the coffee shop. She read it on a Tuesday morning before work, sitting in her apartment with Iris in her lap, turning the pages of the tablet on her knee. She read it all the way through. She thought it was honest, which was the thing she had asked for when she agreed to the interview. She put the tablet down. She looked at Iris, who was looking at the window where the morning light was doing something interesting. "Well," Lena said. Iris looked at her. "I think we are okay," Lena said. Iris made a sound that was approaching, very closely, a word, not quite there yet, but close, the shape of language forming itself in the particular urgent way of a person who has a great deal to say and is working on the tools to say it. Lena looked at her daughter's face, at those dark eyes that were hers, and also something entirely new, something that had not existed before Lena made it, with everything she had, and she thought, "You are going to say so many things. You are going to have so much to say." She held her close. Outside, the April morning was doing what it does in the north, deciding, slowly and beautifully, to be spring again. The light on the rooftops through the window was warm and particular, the kind that only this time of year produces, and the city below the window was waking up and going about itself, ordinary and continuous, and unaware of everything that had happened in this apartment, and the apartments before it, and the highway before that. Lena sat in it for a moment longer. Just this. The light, and Iris, and the warmth of the morning, and the quiet before the day, needed her to begin. She breathed. She thought about the apple tree at Mabel's house, about its bare branches on the night she had first arrived, and its small green buds on the morning she had left. She thought about what Clara had said about the strong one being the one walking away. She thought about 11 miles, and a cast, and a $61 starting point, and a room that became a home, and a job that became a purpose, and a man who had said, "Someone who carries that much alone deserves to be offered a choice." She thought about the highway, the long gravel shoulder, the trucks passing, the fog lifting. She thought about how she had stopped counting steps and started talking to her daughter about crows and apple trees, and a grandmother named Rose. She thought about the next visible point, and the one after that, and the one after that. She thought about what it means to keep going, when keeping going is the only thing left, and how that is not a small thing. It is actually the largest thing, the fundamental human thing, the thing that cannot be taken from you as long as you decide it cannot. She had decided. She kept deciding. Every single day. She got up. She settled Iris on her hip, who grabbed her ear very much the way she had grabbed Caleb's ear 4 months ago, decisively and with full commitment, and Lena laughed, and adjusted her grip, and picked up her bag, and opened the door. The morning was outside, wide and ordinary, and full of the next thing. She walked into it. The weeks at Nora's house settled into a pattern that was both ordinary and quietly restorative, in the specific way that ordinary things can restore you when you have been through a long stretch of extraordinary difficulty. Lena learned the particular rhythm of that household the way you learn any small world, through the repetition of its days, through the accumulation of small knowing, through the gradual discovery of which things mattered and which things did not. She learned that Oliver needed 15 minutes of what Nora called decompression time when he came home from his day program. Quiet time, with a book or his building blocks, no demands placed on him, before he was ready to engage with the rest of the afternoon. She learned that Nora's preferred way of receiving a difficult day was a cup of tea made without being asked and left on the counter near wherever she was standing, with no commentary required. She learned that the third stair from the bottom creaked if you stepped on the right side of it, and did not creak if you stepped on the left, which was the kind of specific local knowledge that marks the difference between being somewhere temporarily and actually living somewhere. She brought the same attention to the work that she brought to everything, thorough, consistent, without ceremony. She cleaned in a systematic way, rather than an impressionistic one, working through a space from top to bottom, so that nothing was missed and nothing was done twice. She organized the kitchen in the way that made the most practical sense for the specific people who used it daily, which is different from organizing it in the way that looks cleanest, and Nora noticed the difference within a week and said so. She prepared food with the same honest economy she had applied to her own cooking during the months at Mabel's. Nothing elaborate, nothing wasted, everything sufficient, and often better than sufficient. Oliver ate her food with the focused attention of a child who has not yet learned to perform politeness about food, and therefore just either eats or does not eat. And he ate, which she took as the only review that mattered. She thought about Grey Hollow less than she expected to. The settlement had occupied so much of her attention, had been the thing she oriented herself by for 3 years, and she had assumed that its absence would leave a loud gap. Instead, what she found was more like a quiet. Not the absence of something needed, but the absence of something that had been a constant low-level pressure, a noise she had stopped hearing, because it had been present for so long. Grey Hollow had required a specific kind of vigilance, the vigilance of someone who knows they are tolerated, rather than belong to, who is always slightly monitoring the room, always slightly ready for the shift in temperature that means someone has decided to make something clear. She had not known how much of her attention that was taking until the attention was no longer required. She did not miss it. She missed certain things, the particular light in the valley in October, the smell of the gathering fires, a couple of her neighbors who had been genuinely kind to her even within the constraints of the place. She missed what she had thought the bond with Darian was, in the early years, before she had understood the limits of what he was capable of offering. She did not miss the daily recalibration of herself to fit a space whose dimensions had been set by other people's requirements. She had not known, until she was no longer inside it, how much of herself had been bent in the service of that fitting. Here she did not have to bend. Nora did not require her to be anything other than what she was: capable, direct, reliable, occasionally funny in the dry way that Nora also was. The household had its own personality, and she had been added to it as herself, rather than as a performance of someone who might be acceptable. That was new. It was so new, in fact, that she did not notice it immediately, the way you do not notice the absence of a sound that has been playing for a very long time, until one morning it is simply not there. The resource center called her for an informal conversation in March, which Gloria had arranged quietly over the course of several months. Gloria did not make things into events when they did not need to be events. She simply noted, one morning when Lena came in to pick up some additional paperwork for the legal process, that she had been watching Lena for several months now, and that the way Lena spoke to people who were in difficult situations, the quality of attention she brought, the specific combination of directness and warmth, was not something that could be trained into a person. It was something they either had or they did not. She asked whether Lena had ever thought about doing this kind of work formally. Lena said she had been thinking about exactly that. Gloria said she had suspected as much. The conversation that followed was practical and specific in the way that Gloria's conversations always were. There was a training process. There were certain qualifications that could be pursued over time. The immediate need was for someone in intake and first support. The first conversation a person had when they came in, the cup of tea and the sign-in sheet, and the voice that said you are in the right place, and meant it. The compensation was honest rather than generous. The work was not always easy, and sometimes it was very hard, and it required the ability to receive other people's distress, without either absorbing it or deflecting it. Lena said she understood that last part. Gloria said she knew Lena understood it. That was why she was asking. The training took 12 weeks, done alongside her work at Nora's house, in the evenings after Oliver was in bed, and Iris was settled, and the house was quiet. She studied the welfare codes she had once been failed by in enough detail to be able to cite sections from memory. She learned the referral networks, and the housing pathways, and the legal aid processes. She sat in on intake conversations with a senior staff member and watched the specific craft of being present with someone who is arriving from a difficult road, the way you receive them without rushing them, the way you make the next step clear without making the whole distance visible at once, because the whole distance is not what is needed right now. What is needed right now is the next step. She was good at it from the beginning, and she knew she was good at it, which was not arrogance but honesty. She had been the person on the other side of that desk. She knew what the desk felt like from there. She knew what made the difference between a conversation that helped and a conversation that was technically helpful, but did not actually reach the person who needed it to reach them. She knew about the cup of tea and the lamp by the waiting area and the voice that said good morning and meant it. She brought all of that to the training and then to the work, and it was, from the first day, exactly what she had understood it would be: necessary and honest, and hers. Iris's first birthday arrived on a clear day in autumn, the kind of day that has sharp, clean edges, and light that comes at an angle and makes everything look more significant than it usually does. Lena made a small cake in her apartment. She had her own apartment by then, the third-floor place on the east side of the city, the one with the view she liked in the mornings. She invited Nora and Oliver and Gloria and a woman named Harriet she had stayed in touch with from her time at the shelter. It was not a large gathering. It did not need to be. Oliver explained to Iris at length the significance of birthdays, including the fact that she was now required to eat cake, which he demonstrated. Iris touched the frosting with one finger, and then put the finger in her mouth with an expression of complete absorption. Calum had sent something. A small, soft toy, a pale green rabbit, which arrived in the post 2 days before with no card, except a note in his handwriting that said, "For Iris, 1 year." Lena had put it in Iris's hands, and Iris had immediately put one ear of it in her mouth, which Lena decided to take as approval. She set the pale green rabbit on the windowsill next to her mother's photograph the night of the birthday, after everyone had gone and Iris was asleep and the apartment was quiet. She looked at both of them in the lamplight, the photograph of Rose and the small rabbit from Calum, and she thought about the particular strange journey of a year. What a year can contain when it is determined to contain things. She had started this year with nothing she had planned for, and nothing she had wanted, and nothing she had chosen. She was ending it with a job she believed in, and a child who was healthy, and a place that was hers, and a person who was becoming important to her, in the way that real importance builds. slowly, through consistency, through the accumulated evidence of small true things. She was ending it with a legal record that would outlast anything Grey Hollow's counsel had said, in a room she had walked out of, without looking back. She was ending it herself, all the way through, still here. She looked at the photograph. Rose's eyes looked back at her, with that particular steady regard. "I know," Lena said. "One step at a time." The apartment was very quiet. Iris made a small sound from her crib in the other room. The particular sound she made when she was deep asleep and dreaming something interesting, and Lena listened to it for a moment, and then turned out the lamp and went to bed. The morning was coming. The morning was always coming, and she would be up for it, the way she had been up for all the other mornings, the way she intended to be up for every morning that followed, because that was the thing she had decided and gone on deciding, and would keep deciding for as long as it was required, which she understood might be her whole life, and found she did not object to at all. She was still here. Both of them were. They were going to keep going. That was the whole of it, and it was enough, and it was more than enough. And she let herself, at last, in the quiet of her own apartment, on her daughter's first birthday, with the rabbit on the windowsill, and the photograph of Rose, and the job she was good at waiting for her in the morning, simply rest. The next day she got up early. She made tea. She watched the light come over the rooftops in the particular way it came at this time of year in this city, through a specific gap between two buildings that she had identified in her first week, and had been watching every clear morning since. She watched Iris wake up and look at the ceiling, and then look at her with those dark eyes, and make the reaching sound that meant she was ready to start the day. Lena picked her up. She held her at the window and showed her the light on the rooftops. "Look at that," she said. Iris looked. She put one hand against the glass and left a small handprint there, and looked at it with the focused attention of someone doing something important. Lena looked at the handprint. She looked at the light. She looked at the city going about its morning below them, ordinary and continuous, indifferent to everything that had happened in this apartment and the apartments before it, and on the highway before that. She held Iris close. The day was beginning. She walked into it. There is a particular quality that develops in a person who has survived something difficult not by luck alone, but by continuous and deliberate choice. It is not a loudness. It does not announce itself. It sits quietly in the way the person enters a room, in the quality of their attention when someone else is speaking, in the specific economy of their words when words are needed, and their comfort with silence when they are not. Lena had this quality by the time she had been at the resource center for 6 months, and the people who worked alongside her recognized it, without necessarily being able to name it. Gloria named it once, briefly, during a Thursday morning check-in when she said simply, "You know what it actually costs." That is the thing that is hardest to teach. Lena had said she knew. Gloria had said she knew Lena knew, which was why the work was going the way it was. The work was going well. She had been right that she would be good at it, and the rightness of that was not a boast but a relief. The relief of finding the thing that fits, the thing you are made for in the specific way that some people are made for specific things, not by nature alone but by experience, by the particular shape that a life carves out of a person when it is asking a great deal of them for a long period of time. She had been asked a great deal. She had been carved into a particular shape, and the shape fit the work. She received each person who came through the door with the same quality of attention she had wished for, on the morning she had been that person. She did not perform warmth. She was warm. She did not perform patience. She was patient in the specific way that requires nothing in return, the way that is offered freely and completely, and without condition. She asked the questions in the right order. She listened to the answers more than she listened to the silences, and she listened to the silences more than she listened to the sounds. She knew when someone needed information, and when they needed to feel received before they could take in any information at all. And she knew the difference, which is not a small thing to know. She thought sometimes, on the harder days, about Route 9, about the fog and the gravel and the trucks and the specific weight of the backpack and the specific warmth of Iris against her chest and the specific pain of the arm and the way she had decided to stop counting steps and start talking instead, talking about crows and light and a grandmother named Rose. She thought about how close it had been to not working out, not in a frightening way, not anymore, but in the clear, honest way of someone who understands exactly what they came through and what it required of them. She thought about Calum stopping his vehicle on the shoulder of a highway and getting out and holding his hands where she could see them. She thought about how different the morning could have been if that vehicle had not stopped, or had stopped and been different, or if she had been too afraid to accept what was offered. She thought about the particular alignment of things that had made the morning what it was: the broken bus schedule, and the cold, and the 11 miles, and the crow on the fence post, and the vehicle on the shoulder. How many things had to be exactly what they were for any given thing to turn out the way it turns out? She did not spend very long on this thinking. It was not the kind of thinking that produced anything useful. But she allowed herself to know it sometimes, the narrow margin of things, and to feel the full weight of the gratitude that came with knowing it. Iris took her first real independent steps on a Thursday afternoon in March, in the kitchen of the apartment while Lena was standing 6 feet away holding a dish towel and not even looking at her. Iris pulled herself upright against the cabinet, released it, stood for 3 full seconds with an expression of profound internal negotiation, and then walked 4 steps to Lena's legs and grabbed them. Lena looked down. Iris looked up. They regarded each other for a moment. "Yes," Lena said. "You did that." Iris's expression shifted into something that was not quite a smile yet, in the full recognizable sense, but was heading toward one with great determination, and Lena sat down on the kitchen floor right where she was, and pulled Iris into her lap, and held her there for a long moment with both arms around her, the dish towel still in her hand, the rest of the apartment entirely irrelevant. She thought, "We did that, both of us, together." She called Calum that evening and told him. He was quiet for a moment after she described it, and then he said, 4 steps, as if confirming the number for a record he was keeping, and something in the careful way he said it made her understand that he was holding this, the way you hold something precious, and she let herself acknowledge that she was glad. She was glad of him. She was glad of what they were building, slowly and honestly and without rushing. It was going somewhere that she could not yet fully see, but she had learned, on a highway and in a boarding house and in a shelter and in a small apartment with a view of rooftops, that not being able to see the whole distance does not mean the road is not there. It means you are still in the middle of the journey, which is exactly where living people tend to be. She was living. She was moving forward. She had her daughter, and her work, and her apartment, and her mother's photograph, and the pale green rabbit on the windowsill, and a person who said things that were true, and waited, without becoming resentful, for her to be ready for what came next. She had survived a Tuesday. She had survived the highway. She had survived the elastic bandage and the $61, and the boarding house eviction, and the 3 o'clock hours, and the council hall, and the 30 seconds, and everything that had preceded all of it, going back to the beginning of the story, which was not the morning in the council hall but much earlier than that, back to the morning she had arrived in Grey Hollow with her 2 bags, and her willingness to belong, and her belief that belonging was a thing she could make happen through effort and consistency, and being small enough. She was not small anymore. She had not been small for some time. She was the exact size she was supposed to be, and it had taken everything to arrive at knowing that, and she was not willing to give it back for anything. Iris fell asleep against her shoulder on the kitchen floor, warm and heavy with the particular weight of a sleeping child who has trusted you completely, and Lena held her and looked at the late afternoon light coming through the kitchen window at the particular angle that always made her think of something worth painting, though she was not a painter, and she thought, This is the thing, this ordinary warm moment in a small apartment in a city she had arrived at on a broken arm. This is the thing she had walked 11 miles through the cold to reach. Not the specific moment, which she had not been able to imagine, but the possibility of a moment like this, the possibility of ordinary, the possibility of warm. She had carried that possibility inside her through everything, the way she had carried Iris on the highway, pressed close, protected, kept breathing no matter what the road asked. She was still carrying it. She intended to keep carrying it. The morning would come, and she would get up for it, and she would choose the next step, and then the one after that, and then the one after that, for as long as there were steps to choose, which she understood would be for a very long time. That was what she had. That was what she was. That was enough, and more than enough, and she held her daughter close in the late afternoon light and breathed, and the world went on around her, ordinary and continuous, and full of all the next things waiting to be walked toward. She was ready. She had always been ready. She just had not always known it yet.